All right, perfect. So once again, if you're just joining us, you're just logging on right now. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Christie Ruggiere. I'm an Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions, and I am joined with my wonderful colleague, Christine. If you want to introduce yourself again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Delong. I am an assistant director here at the university, and I'm super excited to talk to you all a little bit about the admissions committee today.
Yes, we're so excited to be here. This is our first webinar in our application preparation workshop series that we offer every year. So that means once a month for the next couple months, we are partnering with experts across the university for you to learn more about the admissions process. So that's going to include how to help choose a major. So Marna Maza from the first year exploratory studies program is going to help walk you through some exercise to really help figure out, how to determine what plan of study is a good fit for you, and being undeclared is perfectly fine as a choice. We are going to have Dan Driscoll from the Drexel Writing Center do an awesome workshop that's hands-on, actually walking you through exercises on how to prepare your college application essay. And then we also are going to have Katie Gross from Westfall College of Media Arts and Design to talk to you about how to prepare a portfolio if you're applying to an arts program. So definitely, if you like this session, check it out. They're all going to be recorded and posted on the website. But Christine and I are here today to talk to you about the admissions committee. So this is going to be an insider's guide to the admissions committee. We're going to be talking about applications, helping you better understand, what do we actually look for on an application? What is exactly determines if you're going to be the right fit for a university. And then also we're going to actually turn it onto you guys, and you're going to actually walk through a case study yourself to see what it's like to make those decisions. So super glad you're here. We are going to be using breakout rooms today. So I do want to just give you a little bit of a preparation right now that we will be asking you to unmute yourself and talk amongst one another in a breakout room. So just keep that in mind depending on where you're located and if you need to regroup or anything like that. But yeah, so that's just a great intro. We're super excited to be here. And Christine, I'll pass it off to you to kind of jump into the material.
Awesome. Thanks, Christy. So before we actually jump into the case study and talk about some applications today, we do want to turn it on to you and ask you all what exactly you think when you're filling out your applications. What do you think colleges, admissions representatives are really looking at in your applications? If you want to answer this question in the chat, there are no right or wrong answers. There's typically a lot of things that we're looking for in those applications, but what do you think is the most important? Someone said passionate students, GPA, well-rounded student with leadership skills, goals and aspirations, good character, good grades, well-rounded activity lists. So quite a few things here that you think colleges are looking for, and all of these answers are very different. And I think that's very interesting. And they all really, at the end of the day, do play a role in your college applications, because a lot of universities like Drexel are doing what we call a holistic review process. This is a selection process that really considers a lot of different factors within your application. We may be looking at academics, experiences, interests, while reviewing your applications to really see what the entire picture of who you are as a student and how you would fit into our university. So Christy's going to talk a little bit about the different pieces of the application and what colleges are looking for in each of them.
Perfect. Thanks, Christine. And so I think that's a great definition of a holistic review. A few things that I would like to add to that is, maybe you've heard that phrase before. If you're already deep into your college search, you've already been talking to admissions officers and admissions counselors. But another way to look at it and to really think about it is that we're looking at you as a whole person. So I did see someone mention that GPA is an important factor. I was surprised, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to hear that there was no one that put standardized test scores, because they do play a role, but it's not everything. And really, holistic review is, once again, seeing you as a whole person, but beyond just those numbers, whether that's class rank or GPA or test scores if you're submitting them, if a school requires them. It's looking at everything that is in between those numbers. Now, that's not to say that academics is not important, right? Because at the end of the day, no matter where you choose to attend college, the goal is to go, it's to enroll in courses, it's to successfully graduate and earn a degree, right? So that is a big factor. That's definitely a big piece of the puzzle, because, you know, of course, all those other pieces, such as your, you know, the culture of the school, you know, the type of institution, the climate of the institution, and, you know, your personality traits and how those things blend together, that's certainly important. But we do have to look at the academics to make sure that you actually are in a place to succeed in the courses that the university is offering. So academics is really the first part. That's definitely an important piece. But once again, as I said, it's not just those numbers, it's the story between those numbers, right? So you can have a 3.4 GPA, but what exactly does that 3.4 GPA mean, right? So when we're reviewing an application, we are looking beyond that number to see your curriculum, right? So are you taking honors classes or AP or IB or dual enrollment to challenge yourself? We are not necessarily expecting every student who applies to an institution to be in all AP classes or all dual enrollment. We are just looking to see that you challenge yourself where appropriately, right? So if you are going to be a physics student, are you taking AP physics, or are you taking that IB physics course? Because that's where your interests are, that's where your strengths are, and you're choosing to challenge yourself in those areas. That's definitely a piece of the puzzle. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that because we're doing holistic review, a part of our job is to really truly understand where you're coming from, right? So if you're at a school that only has 2 AP classes or only has honors courses and doesn't have dual enrollment or IB, that's also perfectly okay. We are just making sure, we just are looking to see that you are challenging yourself and you're taking advantage of the academic opportunities that your school is offering, whatever that looks like. So even if that is just one additional higher level course, or maybe it's none, as long as you're taking advantage of it. Grade trends is another really important piece of this puzzle. So once again, let's go back to that 3.4 GPA example. Have your grades been going up over time, or have they been going down over time? I think that that's a really important piece of the puzzle. You know, a common thing that we sometimes see, unfortunately, is students in their senior year, because it's their senior year, they've already applied to colleges, all of a sudden then we see a bunch of failing grades near the end when they graduate. Those sorts of things are really important to us. We're seeing an upward trend from grade 9 to grade 12. That's super helpful and really valuable to us, because it shows that you're actually improving. If we see a downward trend, that tells a little bit of a different story. Test scores, once again, if those are required, if they're required, you are certainly welcome to send them. Once again, a lot of schools are test optional at this time, so it is just a piece of the puzzle. And if you are applying to some test optional schools, I would really encourage you to reflect and just think about, you know, whether you think those test scores are really going to enhance your application and make it stronger than it already is. In addition to that, class rank, and once again, that school profile, helping us really understand your institution. And we have a great question here that really goes back to that. What if your school structure did not offer honors, AP, or IB, but you have a high GPA? That's perfectly fine. As I just mentioned, we're just looking for you to challenge yourself with what is offered. If you don't have any higher level courses, but you have a high GPA, that shows us that you are a strong student in the school that you attended. If a student has all these AP courses or IB courses available and they're not taking any, that high GPA, we're going to look at a little bit differently. So rest assured, it's perfectly fine. It's not going to negatively impact your application if you don't have these things at the institution. I see a question from Kieran about test scores. Drexel specifically is test optional. Since we're talking about admissions in general, you are definitely going to want to look at every school separately, but Drexel specifically is test optional. So beyond the academic piece, then it's essentially everything else, right? So letters of recommendation are so helpful because it helps us understand who you are in the classroom, right? So letters of rec should usually come from a guidance counselor or from a teacher, and it just gives us a different perspective on how you do in the classroom. We can get some real, true anecdotes and stories about your successes during that time. My recommendation is to ask teachers who you have good relationships with, not just the one that necessarily you have the highest grade in. You can have a straight A in a class that you literally never talk to the teacher, and that letter of recommendation is probably not going to be as insightful as another course, right? You can have a letter. I actually would say that a letter of recommendation from a teacher where you struggle in the class, but you really have a close relationship with that teacher, that letter of recommendation is going to be much stronger because they're going to be able to speak to the fact that, like, say, hey, yeah, you know what? They do have a C in pre-calc, but I can tell you that this student worked so hard and came every single day and is really dedicated to improving. And it does not take their academics lightly. And that C is something that they're really proud of, and I'm really proud of for them too. That story is much more powerful to us than just saying, oh yeah, Christine showed up, she did her work, it was pretty good. I do see a question in the chat about, can a letter of recommendation be from a parent? Typically, no, they do need to be someone that's affiliated with the school. So that would typically be a teacher or a high school counselor. If there's anything, that's typically what we're looking for. I can't guarantee that a letter of recommendation from a parent would be even read. Your parent could theoretically submit it, but some schools might not take that into consideration. Essays are super awesome. I love an essay because it is the opportunity for you to tell your story today, right? If you're submitting test scores, that's just a snapshot of who you are at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And honestly, no one is their best selves at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So that's something to consider. And your transcripts are a story of who you are over 4 years. And I know that who I was 4 years ago is definitely not who I am today, especially if I'm comparing my 9th grade self to my 12th grade self. And all that context is super helpful, but the essay is the perfect opportunity for you to speak directly to the admissions office about who you are now. And you can say, hey, you know what? Maybe I had a tough 10th grade year because I had XYZ going on, or maybe I didn't care about school in 10th grade, but I care now and I've grown and I'm really proud of who I am. And those sorts of stories are really valuable. I don't want to go too much into the types of things to talk about because that's a whole other can of worms in and of itself, but I would definitely say you should come back for our webinar. I believe it's next month because Dan is fantastic. He has some really great writing exercises that you'll walk through, and I think it'll really help prepare you for that process. Other things that are taken in mind, interviews and demonstrated interest. Some schools do take these things in mind. Not every school necessarily. Drexel, for example, does not do interviews. They do not track demonstrated interest, but some institutions do. They, a school that is more selective wants to admit students that they know actually want to come. So things such as, visiting campus, doing an interview, attending online webinars, those things can be taken into consideration. It's important to ask though, because we don't need you to go above and beyond on these things just because you think it's going to impress the admissions committee if it's not going to be taken into consideration, for example, here at Drexel. If you know what major you're applying to, that information can be put into context. Now, rest assured, you don't need to know what you want to study. Applying undeclared is perfectly fine, and many students even change their major once they come to an institution. But if you are in that small category that says, you know what, ever since I was 7 years old, I knew I wanted to be an engineer, then by all means, if you apply directly to that program, we will take it into consideration, right? If you're applying to engineering, we're going to look more closely at your math and science classes than your Spanish grades, because you don't need any Spanish to be an engineer. unless you want to be an engineer in Spain, I guess, but in general, we're not going to, and then vice versa, right? So if you decide that you want to be a communications major, we're not going to look as closely at your calculus grade because that's not a skill set that you need to be successful in those sorts of programs. So just keep that in mind too. A few other quick things, extracurricular activities, that lets us know what you do outside of the classroom, which is just as important as what you do inside the classroom. When you go to college, you're going to be spending a ton of time there. And that is going to be not only your academic home, but your social life for those 4 or 5 years. And so the admissions offices really like to see what it is you're passionate about, because that's going to give us insight into what kind of things you might enjoy doing on campus outside the classroom. One thing I like to highlight about that is that it doesn't necessarily always just need to be clubs. If you have a part-time job, if you're really involved in your church, if you volunteer with a nonprofit organization, if you actually help take care of your younger siblings, all those things are still extracurricular activities. It could, even if you just, even if you are really big into video games and you design your own video games at home, and that's like an independent project that you do by yourself, those are still extracurricular activities. So don't be shy. There are many students that are not afraid to brag about themselves on their college application. And so I just want to reiterate that this is the time for you to brag. This is the time for you to highlight what it is that you're strong at, what it is you're good at. And so please don't leave anything out in that section. Finally, your background is super important, and you're going to see this while we do the case study today, helping us understand, are you the first person in your family to go to college? Are you, if we're talking about Drexel as an example, are your parents alumni? Those sorts of things are just interesting data points that help us understand, maybe why you're applying to Drexel, or maybe why you have a grade that wasn't as successful in a particular area because you have a learning difference. Maybe you had a learning difference that wasn't diagnosed until later in high school, and that's why your English classes aren't as strong as they could be. All those things, if you're comfortable sharing, by all means do. You're not required to, but if you do have any, special circumstances or anything in your background that you think can help just further illuminate your full and truest story as a person, please feel free to do so. My last piece of advice that I want to share on this slide, because I know I've been doing quite a bit of talking on this slide, is there is a section on the common application and the coalition application that is not the essay section, but it says, is there anything else that you want to share? And it's essentially a free form box that is not a formal essay. It's just an opportunity for you to give us a little bit more information about anything you want. Don't be afraid to use that box. That is actually my favorite part of the application. It gives us so much more insight into who you are as a person, while still allowing you to use that essay space to just talk about something that you're passionate about. For example, if you moved across the country after 10th grade because your dad got a new job, that's an important thing for us to know, and maybe you went from a super tiny private school to a very large public school, and that adjustment has been hard on you, and you're still kind of finding your footing in these larger classes. That's really important context for us to understand you as a student, but you probably also like other things more than that you want to talk about in your essay. So those are the sorts of things that I just want to highlight is a great thing to add to your application in those areas. I did see a question pop in. What is the preferred length that an essay should be? I believe that there is actually a cap on this. Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 500 words is the max.
I think that's correct.
Yes. So there is actually a cap. So when you're typing in the word, in the text box, you will get cut off. But once again, I believe 500 words is the maximum. Whew, okay. I want to pause there for a second. Is there any questions about anything that we just covered? So that's the information that we're looking for. Now, one thing that I wanted to highlight, and Christine and I wanted to highlight, was how this review process typically works in an admissions office. Now, every place is different. Some places don't do it this way, but I just want to give you an example, and we just want to walk you through how this review can go. So at Drexel, every application is reviewed at least 2 times. So the first review, the first read of the application is always going to be done by your territory manager. So no matter where you live, no matter where you are in the country, everyone in this presentation is assigned a territory-based admissions counselor. And their goal is to, well, they're responsible for managing all the applications from the area and also knowing the students who are applying and the schools that they are coming from. So Christine, maybe while I'm chatting, if you want to put the link in the chat box for our representatives list so folks can look up who their counselor is, I think that would be super great. And so as I was talking about, knowing the school that you're coming from, knowing the culture, knowing the place, knowing the types of activities that are available to you, is all done by the territory manager. And we travel to your schools. We're traveling again this fall, which is super exciting. And that's so that all that information can be taken into context. So once again, going back to that example, if you have no higher level classes, the territory manager, because they visited your school, because they've met you, because they met your counselor, can still say, hey, they have a really high GPA. And they have a really high GPA, and that's a really strong applicant from the school. These are assigned by the school that you attend. So you can definitely look them up on the list that Christine just reviewed. Territory managers are essentially the same as regional representatives. Regional representatives just also live where they manage, right? So we're in Philadelphia. Most of our team is based in Philadelphia, but we do have one regional representative who lives in California. She does the same exact job as us. She just lives in California so that she's closer to the applicants. So essentially you can think of them as the same, but if you hear of a regional representative, you just know that they're always living in your backyard. So when they do the first review, they're taking all this context into consideration and they are recommending a decision and saying, hey, you know what? Based off of what I know about this school, based off of what I read in this application, I believe this student is a good fit. I recommend and accept. We then do a second review by college liaisons. So in addition to being territory managers, not everyone, but most folks on our team are responsible for knowing intimately the programs from a particular college or school. So for example, I'm an international admissions counselor. So I manage applicants from internationally, but I also am the liaison to the College of Engineering. I work really closely with the College of Engineering. I talk to them about their goals. I talk to them about what's a good fit for their programs. And so any student that applies to the College of Engineering, regardless of where they live, I then review their application a second time. And I look more closely at the academics with that lens. And I say, oh, you know what? This student had a C in pre-calc. A C in pre-calc might not be a good fit based off of what I know about our engineering programs. And then I make a second recommendation. So in the example I'm talking about, the territory manager said, I think a good fit, yes. But then I looked at it a second time with the academic lens and I said, but based off of what I know about engineering, I'm not confident that they can academically succeed in this particular program, even though overall they're a good applicant. Then if we don't agree, then it goes to department review. That's when we actually gather around a table, multiple people on the team, sometimes even representatives from the college you're applying to join us, and we discuss your application and make a decision. If the territory manager and the college liaison agree and they both say yes, accept, then it's an accept. If they both say deny, then it's a deny. But once again, if there's ever any conflict, if the liaison and the territory manager are not on the same page, then that's when an application is reviewed multiple times and eventually it comes to a decision. So once again, this is just an example, but I think the point is to really highlight that we do a really thorough job of reviewing your application. There's a ton of information in your file, and we only have about 10 minutes to read your application through each time. But because we go through so many checks and balances and so many sets of eyes are put on it, by the time a decision is being sent to your inbox, rest assured, it's been thoroughly reviewed and we've taken all these aspects into consideration. So this is one example. Another way that some schools do it is instead of doing 2 reviews separately, they actually have 2 people sit down at the table and read it at the same time, and they actually have a conversation, and then they just make a decision together at that particular moment. But once again, either way, these are just different ways that we really try to be thorough in our review process. All right, Christine, I'll kick it back to you.
Awesome. So we're about to get into our case study here. So just to let you know, we're going to talk over a case. We're going to give you 3 different applicants, and then you are basically going to go in your own admissions committee. These will be breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. You'll have a few other students in there with you. And as a group, you have to decide on the 3 applications based on everything we've chatted about already, and decide if you should admit a student, waitlist them, or deny them. So you'll have 3 applicants, and you'll have to give each of them one of those decisions. So to go in and talk a little bit about the case itself, we're going to be talking about a university that is Plymouth Shores University. So this is just some background information about the university that we're talking about the university that these applicants are applying to. So this is their university profile. Every university that you may be looking at will have something similar to this. There'll be different statistics about each of those colleges. So before you apply, these are definitely pieces of information that you should be looking into. But for Plymouth Shores specifically, also called PSU throughout this presentation, they have about 6,276 undergraduate students. There is almost an even split between female and males. There is 53% female and 47% male. PSU is a 4-year private liberal arts research university with schools within business, medicine, and engineering, but they also have over 200 majors, minors, and programs within the liberal arts as well. The population of students at PSU is pretty diverse. They have students from 50 states and 85 countries, and athletics are a piece of PSU as they are an NCAA Division I school. So you'll get all of this information in a PDF in just a minute. I'll share that once we go through all of this information. So don't feel like you need to take notes or memorize all this information. And then in addition to the university overview, each university will have an admission overview as well, telling you a little bit about their applicants. So at PSU, they receive about 19,300 applications, and only about 7,000 of those students are actually admitted each year. It's pretty selective. It's about a 36.3% acceptance rate. PSU does accept early action and regular decision applications, but they don't offer early decision. If you know anything about these rounds, you may know that early decision is that binding contract that if you are accepted, you're saying you're going to that school no matter what. Early action just gives you the ability to apply, hear your decision early. Regular decision gives you a little bit more time to submit your materials. In terms of the students that PSU is admitting, these are some averages that I'm going to go over. So keep in mind, they may be admitting students that are under these numbers or above. So the average GPA is somewhere between a 3.49 and a 3.92. But again, students above and below may be admitted as well. In terms of standardized test scores, the SAT composite is about a 1380 to 1480 on average. For the ACT, similarly, it is a 29 to a 32. And interviews are available and encouraged at PSU, so they are taking into consideration that demonstrated interest. And then Christie is going to talk over some different points that you may want to ponder when you're reviewing some of these applications.
Perfect. Thanks, Christine. If you want to start sharing the PDF, I think that would be awesome right now. So you now once again, with this activity, you are going to be the admissions officer. So now you have a really good idea of what PSU looks like, how the context of the type of institution that we want to admit students for. So just a few things that we want to chat through and discuss is, how do we determine a student is a good fit? So here are just a few questions and a few thoughts to think about. How does the student's academic profile compare to PSU's admitted student profile? Are they above the averages? Are they below the averages? Are they right on target? How will the student contribute to the PSU community, right? So, how their extracurriculars, as we talked about, what kind of things are students going to be involved in outside of the classroom? Does a student express a genuine interest to attend PSU? So this school does take demonstrated interest into consideration. They really do want to make sure that students are genuinely interested and genuinely believe that PSU is a good fit for them. And then what are the students' strengths in general? So there are 3 students that we are going to be discussing today. Dory, Marcella, and Henry. And your goal in your sessions is to admit 1, waitlist 1, and deny 1 student. So our first student here is Dory. She is a dual citizen from Nigeria, and both of her parents have college degrees, so she's not first generation. As you can see, her grade trends are here. She has a 3.79 unweighted GPA, but if you look at the graph, it has gone up over time. So started as a 2.8 in her 9th grade, had a peak in 11th grade, and is now settled at a 3.5 in grade 12. The reason why her GPA started off so low is because she was diagnosed with ADD in 10th grade. She was not able to focus in school. She didn't have any, she just wasn't able to kind of target and focus on her work. But after being prescribed medication, after getting her diagnosis, and now knowing how to utilize the Learning Center, she's been on an upward trend ever since. She's now taking 5 honors classes and 2 AP courses. She's applying as a communications and a journalism major, and that is reflected in her after-school activities because she runs a blog, she's on the school newspaper, and she's also the editor-in-chief of the school yearbook, which is similar to a president of a club, if you're not familiar. Her essay is about female empowerment and Disney princesses. And while her counselor doesn't know her very well, she did have a very strong teacher recommendation. As far as interest in PSU, she has done a campus tour. She's done a high school visit. She's met the counselor at a high school visit. Has also done a local PSU preview day and has also met a rep at a college fair. And when she interviewed with an admissions counselor, she did have a really good explanation for why PSU. So that's Dory in a nutshell.
All right, so our second applicant is Henry Liu. He speaks Chinese at home, and he is a first-generation college student. When we are looking at his academics, you can see his grade trend, which is on a slow rise over the past 4 years. And his average GPA unweighted is about a 3.36. In terms of other academic pieces to his application, he is challenging himself. He has taken 5 honors courses, 4 APs, and some dual enrollment courses as well. But he did have a disciplinary action of plagiarism in his 9th grade. Henry is applying to computer engineering as his major, and he shows his interest in computer engineering through some of his activities, like being the president of the computer club and being involved in the robotics club as well. In his essay, he also talked about a speech recognition app to help his grandmother who isn't fully fluent in English. So that also shows his interest in that field of computer engineering. In terms of his letters of recommendation, his counselor does explain the plagiarism and how that was all handled throughout that letter of recommendation. And all of the teachers' letters of recommendation on file were strong as well. Henry did show some demonstrated interest. He attended a campus tour, a college fair, and an interview. And in terms of that interview, it was pretty impressive, and he explained his disciplinary action. But in his supplemental essay of why PSU, that essay was a little confusing for the admissions committee. And then for our third and final applicant, we have Marcela Castillo, who speaks Spanish at home, and her parents are divorced, so she has overcome some adversity there. In terms of her grade trend, you can see it dipped quite a bit in her sophomore year with a 2.42 GPA. But overall, the average is about a 3.05. And as you can see with that trend, after that sophomore year, which might have been a little rough, she did improve the next 2 years. Academically, she is taking 3 honors, 5 APs, 4 of those in total in her senior year, which is when she did very well and ended up with a 3.67 GPA. So that's pretty impressive. Marcella's aunt also attended PSU, so she has some connection with the university and may know a little bit more about it because of that. Her aunt also lived within their family home and unfortunately died when Marcella was in 10th grade. So that could potentially be a reason for her grades dipping in her sophomore year. Marcella is still not sure what she wants to study and is coming in as undecided. In terms of her activities, she is a track athlete, she is involved in community service, and she also takes care of her younger sister. So she included some activities that may not be high school activities, but like we mentioned before, are important for you to include in your applications. For her essay, she was inspired by her aunt's battle with cancer and talked about that within that essay. Her letters of recommendation state from her counselor that her GPA is not indicative of the type of student she is, and all of her other letters are very strong as well. In terms of demonstrated interest, Marcella has attended quite a few programs. She's been to a campus tour, local PSU preview program, and a high school visit as well. And then in terms of her supplement, she had a very solid YPSU, and has a strong interest by the track coach. But this right here is just the main points of every single applicant. You'll see their grade trends here, their academics, what they're applying to, and anything else that has to do with their application. These are just some different pieces of information that you can consider when you're reviewing the application. So when it comes to comparing them to figure out who you want to admit, deny, waitlist, you might want to consider who has the highest GPA, the strongest curriculum. Those might be different people. And who shows the most leadership, who has the best essay, the strongest YPSU supplement, and whatever you think may weigh the applicants to be one maybe better than the other in terms of these different areas. Some other questions that you may consider, these are a little tougher. So is it better to get a B in an AP or an honors class, or in an A in a regular class? So that's something that you can all talk about within your committee discussions, and as well as all of these other questions. And keep in mind that these are only to guide your conversation. You don't need to go through and answer every single question, but they're also maybe helpful for when you are thinking about your own college application process as to what the admissions committee may be considering in terms of these harder questions. So with that, Christy, are you ready to send them off to their breakout rooms?
Yes, I am. As a reminder, you're going to have 15 minutes, maybe 20, depending on if you're having a tough time making a decision, and you do need to come to a consensus. So everyone in the room has to agree who you're going to admit, who you're going to deny, and who you're going to waitlist. So we have a couple different rooms. I'm about to send you out into the breakout rooms. And then Christine and I are going to pop around to check in on you and help with those conversations. So enjoy. good luck. We're really excited to hear what you all decide.
So how did everything go for everybody? We're going to start off now in like talking a little bit about who you all pick. So if y'all want to use the chat box and let us know who you admitted, denied, waitlisted, you can put it in this poll right here and make sure you choose what your group chose. So far, it's looking like we have a few more of you who need to vote, but it looks like most people are denying Henry. Marcella coming in second there. No one waitlisted Henry. We admitted Marcella. We waitlisted Marcella, most of us. Some people waitlisted Dory. And then most people ended up admitting Dory or Henry. So does anyone want to tell me, we'll start with the admits, why most of you admitted Dory or Henry, maybe why you didn't admit Marcella. You can use the chat box to do that.
If you want, we had some good conversations, so feel free to unmute yourselves too. You can raise your hand. I'd love to get some talking too, I think. Chat is also okay, but yeah.
So I guess I'll just add something. So our group, we admitted Dory because we felt that even though she was diagnosed with ADD, she worked really hard to bring it up, and it was a really good growth in her GPA that we saw. And she wanted to major in communications and journalism, and she really did work towards that in high school as the editor-in-chief for her newspaper, I think yearbook it was, newspaper, and she's also a blogger. So she's worked throughout high school to create this passion for journalism, and along with that, strong recommendation letters, strong PSU essay, and she did show interest in the university itself by attending campus visits, preview days, and attending an interview.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Our group did the same thing. We admitted Dory. In comparing her to the other two students, we were talking a lot about like the balance between honors classes and AP classes, and how it showed in her GPA that she seemed to balance the two much better than Marcella did. So our group was kind of deciding, we knew we were going to admit Dory, and we were deciding between Henry and Marcella for waitlist and denial. And we decided to waitlist Marcella, but because like I had shared this piece of advice that my guidance counselor has told me, that they said it's better to have an A in an honors class than a C in an AP class. And I think that kind of shows with Marcella. She has more AP classes and less honors, but her GPA is struggling compared to Dory, who has more honors and less APs. And so that was just kind of like part of our deciding factor. That's why, we chose Dory.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I just want to mention here is when we're talking about Marcella and her APs, keep in mind that she did take 4 of those 5 APs in her senior year, which is when her GPA actually did better. So even though maybe she didn't space them out, or she did struggle a little bit, she did kind of come on top. But yeah, it seems like a lot of people admitted Dory. And then I see in the chat, Samuel said, we thought Henry showed growth beyond his 9th grade plagiarism and showed more drive in his selected major. His confusing essay could be explained somewhat by that he speaks Chinese at home and that he's pursuing a STEM major. That's actually very good insight that I would not have thought of. Very good. That's definitely something to consider when you're reviewing applicants. And something I want to point out is that each of us would review these applicants differently, which is why the committee review process is so important, that you have multiple eyes on an application, because one person may see that an applicant just had a confusing YPSU while the other may look a little bit more in depth like you did. So that's awesome. Anyone else want to share? Did anyone have a hard time looking over these applicants and figuring out who they should admit versus waitlist, or who they should waitlist versus deny? Go ahead, Ariana.
Well, I know that our group had trouble picking between weight had their strengths and weaknesses. So between their strengths and weaknesses, we had to like weed out who would be a best fit for PSU specifically. And I'm sure like we decided to waitlist Marcella, and I'm sure Henry will go on to a different school, but mostly because of her continued interest in PSU specifically as a school and her aunt's legacy that we chose to waitlist her.
Awesome, great insights. Anyone else have trouble deciding? See a chat from Ajay. Dory was for sure win for me. I see the gradual progression for grades and all the activities support Dory's interest and chosen field of study. Yeah, I think that when we're reviewing these applicants, most of them showed that they were interested in a very specific area, like Henry, like Dory, whereas Marcella was more of a applicant who was unsure. So when all of you were reviewing those applications, did you maybe look at Marcella and say, oh, she doesn't even know what she wants to study, and that's why maybe we didn't admit her or waitlist her? Yeah, go ahead, Mills.
I think our group, I mean, we did, notice that one's undecided, one's not. But I think overall, though, I mean, we looked at as what Drex, for example, does holistically. We also viewed it holistically, like as a whole. Yes, she's undecided, but we did see that, she's also, for example, doing track, and that, her track coach also is interested in her, but also see that academically, I mean, eventually she will figure out which major she is. And you'll see as well that for her counselor, she mentioned how that her GPA doesn't reflect how she is as a student, how she is as a person. And so, at least I saw, and our group saw that, she has more fire, she has, more desire. And so, as a student, you want that in your classroom. And I think as a teacher, also do it like that. So I think as a whole, she may be undecided, but I think that was academically, she is strong as a student. So I think, yeah.
Awesome. And we have some other questions that we might just want to discuss here if we haven't already. So all of you, what did you learn about the admissions process and how we are reviewing your applications? Anyone? You didn't learn anything?
How did this exercise make you feel? The importance of context. I hope this was insightful. Now, one thing that I think is important to highlight here is this mirrors what it's like to review an application. This is not identical to how it's like to review an application, right? Because we're essentially just kind of condensing that larger review process into an example that works well in this format, right? But one thing that I would say is that we never pit students against each other. We are just looking at one student to determine if one student is a good fit for that institution in the context of them in a vacuum. So we only are doing it in this, you have to admit one, you have to waitlist one, you have to deny one, for the sake of this activity, to help kind of encourage you to understand the tough decisions that we're making. But we only ever look at one student as an individual. I see someone just put in the Snapchat, thank goodness. So Gabby, rest assured, that's just for this exercise. Sydney, I see you have your hand raised if you want to jump in.
Oh, I was just gonna say I never really kind of looked at it on the other side. Like I never really thought about what like the counselors are comparing to, I guess.
That's awesome. And I think the goal of that is to really help you understand that we are people trying to understand you as people. And when we are reviewing applications, we're really trying to do what we believe is the best fit for the student, to who we believe is going to thrive at the institution that we're representing. So I'm glad this was super helpful. Christine, I didn't mean to like jump in right, in front of you, but
Yeah.
do you want to take it away? And also, who would you admit?
Yeah, so we actually got that question in the chat, and I think it's important to note that I admit all of them. But for myself, looking over them, I really had a sweet spot for Marcella, so I think I would admit her. She was undecided, but she had a rough sophomore year. She would help us out in athletics, so I chose to admit her. And then Dory for me was a waitlist. She was a strong student. And then the only thing with Henry, I was considering denying Henry because his major was computer engineering and there was that plagiarism, which could lead to some hacking. So I decided wanted to deny him. What about you, Christy?
So I actually felt the same, but I do think, I can't remember who put it in the chat, but the points that were brought up about Henry showing his drive by plagiarizing means he really cares about academics. The fact that Chinese is his first language might explain why his essay is not the strongest, and the fact that he is going into a STEM major, he's not going to be writing essays, he's going to be coding stuff. I'm looking back at it now. Samuel wrote that. That's awesome context, and I think a really good, compelling reason to look back at Henry. But I think if I had to choose, I would say the same thing as you, Christine. But that's our personal opinion as an individual in a vacuum in this exercise. Once again, I want to highlight what Christine said. We would actually admit all of these students to Drexel. All these students would thrive. So don't get too hung up on the fact that like, oh no, like I liked this other person and Christine liked, somebody else. This is an activity. It's meant to be hard. It's actually built to not have one right answer, because this is not really a puzzle. It's a very human process. And so this is just to kind of highlight that.
So before we end today, does anyone have any last minute questions or any insights about this session today? I know you already shared a bunch of them, but if anyone has any final words, things they've learned, those are always great. Ellie, go ahead.
So when we were looking, I know that you said to not take all of the stuff about the students super seriously when it comes to ourselves, but when we were talking about the interest in the school and like all that kind of stuff where it listed that some of them had college tours, visits with the admissions office, does doing this kind of stuff with you guys, like doing these webinars or like being on the email list, does that go into any sort of log that admissions counselors at Drexel can see?
That's a good question. So there are, I think, pros all around to attending those events, whether we look at them or not. I think it'll give you some context of the university that you may be applying to by attending those events. But for Drexel specifically, we are not looking at whether you attended tours or anything, but that may help you learn a little bit about the university. So I wouldn't say only attend events at schools that are paying attention to that, because there's value in attending them, even if schools will not be looking at those areas.
Yeah. To build off of that, everything in relation to your interactions with a college for most schools at this point are tracked. We do have access to that information, but that doesn't mean that every institution is looking at it. So Drexel does not formally look at that. And as Christine said, there's still that pro, but the other pro is that if Drexel is a better fit for you, right? Like by attending these sessions, by learning more about the institution, it's going to help you make a more informed decision about where you want to attend. And even though we don't do formal interviews, I saw someone put that question in the chat, taking the time to get to know your territory manager is going to help you feel more comfortable at the school. It's going to help you have a support system if you decide to attend. And in addition, like while we're not taking this formally into consideration, it is always nice. It is always a nice feeling for us to open an application of someone that we've met or someone that we've talked to. Definitely makes the day of reading a little bit more pleasurable.
Yeah, definitely. And meeting with that territory manager of yours, they may be able to give you some insights that are directed specifically towards maybe your interests, what you're looking for in a university, and they may give you some information that you may not have gotten from a general, maybe virtual visit or in-person visit at Drexel or any other university. Another question that we got is about applying early decision and whether we take that additional interest into consideration. And I think that we review applications typically very similarly for our early decision and early action pools, but that early decision definitely shows us that we are one of your top schools, and that always is good to see. And Christy, if you have anything else to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, with an early decision application, it does mean that if admitted, you will be attending. So we do take that a little bit into consideration, while once again, there's no formal demonstrated interest in the review process. We understand that early decision students want to attend Drexel and will attend if admitted. And so we will just take a little bit of additional consideration to see if they're a good fit. That being said, at the end of the day, there's no, we do not have a very large early decision applicant pool at this point in time. The vast majority of our students do come in early action and regular decision. So I do not recommend you apply early decision unless you truly know Drexel is your number one choice and finances are not a consideration. So really, I think at this point, all of them are a good option, and they're not going to strongly sway your admissions decision no matter what.
This next question may also be a good question for you. You mentioned that you work with international students. So one of these students asked, can you give a few tips to an international student?
I mean, I think that as far as in the context of this, basically all the same. One thing I will say is that we do have a really what's the word I'm looking for? We have a very strong international admissions team, and we are very familiar with international applicants. So this isn't really a tip, but just something I want to reassure you is, I'm not sure where you're from, Ansana, from your comment, but I just want to reassure you that our admissions team is very familiar with students all around the world. So that means we understand your curriculum. We know you're from Nepal. Great. So we understand the educational system in Nepal. We know those grades. We know those exams. We know those grades. So I just want to reassure you that we're going to look at your application with the same exact context, the same exact layers and lens that we use for domestic students. And then of course, always apply for financial aid, because one of the great things about Drexel is we do offer financial aid to all students regardless of their citizenship. So fill out that CSS profile.
And one last question it looks like we have is, do you accept direct applications? And at Drexel, we do only accept first-year applications from the common application or the coalition application. You can fill out either one. We don't care which. It's totally up to your preference. Thank you all for attending today. This was great. Hopefully you all learned something. I know I learned a little bit more from some of your insights within the chat and talking to you all, but I hope you all have a lovely evening, and it was so great being here with y'all tonight.
Thanks, friends. Good luck on your applications.